Welcome back to Old School Sports and our Out of the Park Baseball 24 playthrough of the Buffalo Wings. We have made it past the trade deadline in the 2041 season. Been a good year for the Buffalo Wings. We are trying to win the National League East for the ninth time in 10 years. And as this episode begins, we got a 5-game lead on the Miami Marlins for the NL East. So feeling pretty good about our chances to do that. Our other primary goals over the last couple months of the regular season are to keep the team healthy for what we believe will be a 14th consecutive playoff appearance. And then in a perfect world, we would love to make up the 4 games between us and the Padres and possibly have the best record in the National League and or the best record in baseball. But if we win the NL East and we are as healthy as we are right now for the playoffs, that will be a successful regular season. Certainly could use the few days of additional rest until an NLDS by having a first-round bye. And we have just one significant injury, and it's becoming a familiar theme. Our starting catcher, Mitch Houlihan, for the second consecutive season since he's become our starter, his season ended early. A fractured ankle suffered a few days ago this year. Last year, he tore his Achilles in early August and missed the playoffs and then had a long rehab that took him through spring training. So when Houlihan has been on the field, he's been very successful. He made his first All-Star team this year, ended the season with a .315 average and a 1.9 WAR across the 74 games that he did play. Over the course of his career now, the 28-year-old has a .314 average and almost 1,200 major league at-bats. So he is a very productive offensive player, given his rating profile, thanks in large part to very rarely striking out. And he's also a really good defensive catcher. But he's already fragile physically. Who knows at 29 years old, when he's finally recovered from this injury, whether he'll potentially come back is wrecked. And he's heading into an arbitration year where he's expected to make about $10 million next year. So his long-term and even his medium-term status is in question with us. If he's completely healthy and we can count on him for 130 games, I'd certainly spend $10 million on him next year. But there's no guarantees that that's going to happen. So catcher is something we may need to address this upcoming offseason. We did address it ahead of the trade deadline. Felt fearful that something might happen with Houlihan given his injury proneness. So we were investigating a reunion with Walt Miller throughout the month of July, and we ended up doing it, traded for him from the Rockies. He's having a rough year there, hitting just a .164 with a 53 WRC plus, but he is a more than competent defensive catcher who still has a little bit of pop in his bat and ability to draw walks. And we're going to actually let Miller start against right-handed pitching, and we're going to continue to start Jorge Berrios against left-handed pitching. Berrios, we're still intrigued by him as a backup and intrigued by his bat. He's put up a 120 WRC plus this year in 112 at-bats. Although he's hitting just .223, he has 7 homers and 18 walks. His eye is a great skill for him. But he's a pretty mediocre defensive catcher, and he's not the greatest influence in the clubhouse. So in a perfect world, I think we still intend for him to be the backup behind Miller on most occasions. But we'll see how they both perform over the next month and a half before we have to start making big decisions for the final push for the playoffs and the postseason. If Miller's hitting a .150 for us and Berrios continues to hit well, it might make sense to go with Berrios as the starter despite his weaker defense, and then use Miller as a late inning substitute, particularly once we get to the playoffs. But we've got a couple months to try to figure those things out. And as I mentioned, hopefully make up some ground on the Padres in the standings, hold off the Marlins in the NL East standings, and most importantly, keep the rest of the team healthy the rest of the way this year. And about 2.5 weeks into the month of August, we've extended our lead on the Marlins to 8.5 games. We haven't really been playing that great during this month, but the Marlins are 3-7 over their last 10, while we're 5-5. So we're increasing our probability of winning the NL East. That said, we're still 5 games behind the Padres for the best record in the National League, so getting past them is becoming an increasing challenge for us. And Cleveland has actually passed them for the best record in baseball, and we are 6 games behind the Guardians at this point. So could be a year where all we get is a first-round bye and an NL East title, but if we're healthy, and that's the case, as I said earlier, we're willing to live with it. Deshaun Seifu, 12 steals up on Joe O'Hara in his attempt to lead the National League in stolen bases for a 14th straight year. And our ace Alexis Barajas, 14-3 with a 2.87 ERA, leading the National League in wins at this late point in the month of August. And those of you who have been following closely know one of the top young players in our system, Alejandro Contreras, has actually spent most of this year in AAA. Our young shortstop Jim Andrews, the batting average is dipped to 230, but he's still so good defensively. We've been playing him there. And then Mike Whitehead, who's also a young second baseman, hitting 289 in his rookie year for us. So in order to ensure that Andrews, Whitehead, and Contreras all get playing time, Contreras, who only hit 238 when he was up with us earlier this year, has been playing every day in Albany. Hitting 252 this year with a 111 WRC plus there. The reason I bring him up, still think his contact can get a little bit better, but he's kind of tapped out as far as his gap power in his eye. Still think he's maybe got a notch higher to go in his home run power and his avoid strikeouts, according to our scout. But we've been trying over the years that we've had him at this point, and this is our second full season with him in our organization, to get him adept at as many positions as possible. And at this point, he's started 83 games this year at second base between the two levels. And he still hasn't even maxed out in his ability to play that position. And I think a lot of that is driven by his low work ethic and his low adaptability. Particularly adaptability isn't one of the 3 ratings I care about the most. Typically, it's work ethic, intelligence, and leadership. But I think the combination of the low work ethic and the low adaptability has shown up in the fact that even though we've consistently played him at second base all year, he still isn't as adept at playing that position as we think he could be. And as you can see here, he's still got a decent amount of growth to get fully trained up at first base, third base, and even shortstop. So something that just takes longer with a player like this, and who knows, it may never happen, particularly once he's back in the major leagues, which will be happening in about a week and a half on September 1st. And we're likely going to have less flexibility to play him all over since we're going to be trying to win games. So just one of those little things to pay attention to and think about. If it's a lower adaptability player, by nature of that lower adaptability, it's going to be a bit more of a struggle to get them to be as effective as you think they can be at multiple positions. And we've made it to September 1st and September roster expansion. 9.5 game lead on the Marlins in the NL East. Our magic number is down to 18. But we're definitely fading 5.5 behind the Padres for the best record in the National League. And we are now 7 behind the Guardians for the best record in baseball. So could be a situation where all we end up with is a first-round bye and our 9th NL East flag in 10 seasons, which, again, if we're healthy the rest of the way, would still be fine. Ishmael Velasco, the excellent young outfielder, just turned 24 a couple days ago, made an all-star appearance this year as a rookie, and his 323 average is now third in the National League, 23 home runs, 25 doubles, 153 WRC plus. The international free agent signing from 2034 has definitely been a big asset to our offense. Deshaun Seifu with a 10-steal lead over Joe O'Hara now as he attempts to once again lead the National League in stolen bases. And Barajas at 14-4 is now tied for the league lead in wins with Mark Billings of the Reds and Bob Davis of the Mets. And given that it's September 1st and roster expansion day, we've brought up 4 players. One is the pitcher Luis Palencia, the 24-year-old, who we picked up as an international amateur free agent back in 2035. He was 6-4 with a 3.33 ERA in 20 starts at AAA Albany this year. Looking at his profile, we think he's certainly in the mix to be a member of our staff in future years. His stamina is not exceptional. He wasn't even a 5-inning pitcher on average in Albany. But he certainly has the arsenal to be an effective starter. The issue is whether, if he's only going to be giving us 4 or 5 innings, we want him to be a starter at the major league level or an important arm out of the pen. But think that interested in seeing what he can do. Does have high loyalty, work ethic, and intelligence, as well as low greed. He isn't the greatest leader in the world, and he's also fragile physically. So not a perfect prospect, but at almost 25 years old, definitely time to see what he can do at the major league level. And then we brought up 3 everyday players. Jim Andrews, our shortstop, is diagnosis pending, which is not optimal. We were going to bring up Contreras anyways to see what he can do over the last month of the season at the major league level. So Contreras is up, ended up hitting 247 with a 103 WRC plus at AAA Albany. So he was not as successful in Albany this year as he was a year ago, and he's certainly been less successful at the major league level in the limited sample size than he had in the limited sample size last September. Looking forward to see what he can do for us. Also, Luis Nava, who we picked up in that Bobby Bolig trade with Colorado, which was largely a salary dump for us, but felt that Nava was a pretty interesting prospect to get in return. He was not a top 200 prospect, I don't think, at the time, but he's now viewed as the number 99 prospect in baseball. Hit 270 in AAA this year, 35 doubles, 11 triples, so pretty good at generating extra base hits. Very good defensively, makes some contact, has a little bit of speed, not a lot of power, not the greatest eye in the world. Don't view him as a big-time prospect, but another one of the solid young outfielders in our organization. And then we also brought Tylen Hotaling back up. The left-handed hitter was the last cut we had on our roster as we got down to 26 men this year. Hit 300 with 28 homers and 81 ribbies in AAA Albany again this year, 118 WRC plus. He's been over a 300 hitter every year in Albany, given the youth and depth in our outfield, as well as some of the trades we've made to bolster our outfield over the past few years. Hotaling's had just 4 at-bats at the major league level late last year. Hopefully we'll get a little more view of him over these next 4 or 5 weeks, because he's almost 26 years old and kind of at the point where we're way past needing to figure out whether he's part of our future or whether we should move on from him. And our shortstop, Jim Andrews, is going to be out for about 4 weeks with elbow inflammation, so that is definitely not optimal. You know, as I talked about, we're 9.5 up on the Marlins at this point, so feel pretty good that we're going to win the NL East. 4.5 behind the Padres. Certainly without our best defensive shortstop, it's going to make it a little bit tougher to overcome that, but at least it doesn't seem like it's going to be an injury that's going to impact him for the playoffs. When we take a look at our schedule here, we're going to be playing up through the 29th, and then that's the end of the season since we started on April 1st today, a little earlier than normal. So I guess maybe we have him back for a game or two if he heals a little early, but at the very least, hopefully he's ready for the playoffs. He's not a big-time hitter anyways, would certainly love the opportunity for him to shake a little rust off in a game or two before the playoffs begin. But if that's not the case, he still will certainly be in the mix to potentially be our shortstop, but we'll likely be getting to see some of Mr. Whitehead or Mr. Contreras at shortstop over the next few weeks. So that could be an opportunity if they both continue hitting to potentially push Andrus to the bench even for the playoffs. And here on September 3rd, our big free agent acquisition, Daniel Rojas, suspended 5 games for a fight with the pitcher Eddie Bine of the Angels. Rojas has definitely given us the power that we hoped when we brought him on board with 32 homers and 77 ribbies. The 241 batting average, not what we had hoped in an ideal world, still has put up a 128 WRC plus for us this year. So he's kind of been in that 125 to 135 range that we hoped he would be at when we picked him up. He's now 35 years old. We'll see what type of numbers he ends up with for the season. If he finishes strong, has an outside shot at 40 homers, very outside shot at 100 ribbies, would think that he'll likely come up late on both of those figures, particularly with the fact that he's going to be out for the next 5 days. And one minor move here on September 11th, and before we talk about it, we'll take an updated look at the standings. 9.5 up on the Marlins. Magic number is down to 10. 5.5 behind the Padres for the best record in the National League. So looking increasingly likely that we will have the first round bye, have our 9th NL East in 10 years, but won't have home field advantage throughout the National League playoffs, much less all of the playoffs. Seifu up 12 on O'Hara in his attempt to lead the National League in steals for a 14th straight year, and Barajas in at least a 3-way tie for the lead in wins, and his running mate in our rotation, Sincere Shazier at 15-7, is now also tied with Barajas for the National League lead in Ws this year. Back to the small piece of news, Sean Drawn, who you may remember we claimed on waivers at the beginning of this season from the Dodgers, is a left-handed arm in our bullpen. After a slow start, he's been somewhat more effective, 50 strikeouts in 46 and a third innings. The 4.66 ERA is still not ideal, but feel like with his profile and the fact that he is tougher on left-handers than he is on right-handers, he potentially has a spot as a lefty guy in a bullpen. He approached us looking for a extension, $1.6 million a year for 2 years. We countered him with $1.2 million a year for 3 years with team options in the second and third season. He ended up just agreeing to that. Seems like to me a pretty harmless and easy way to have another left-handed arm in the mix for our team next year, and think with that salary, if we don't want him on the 26-man roster, would be pretty easy to trade him away. Not a big number commitment in terms of the dollars, not a long-term commitment in terms of the years, and we've got a ton of flexibility with the 2-team options, so have him locked up for next year. Starting to think a little bit about our team for next year, and we've got a couple of big holes. The 2 big guys who are going to be free agents are guys that we've traded for in recent years, Luis Coma-Duran and Mike Brodin. Brodin, after a great start to the season, has slowed down a bit. 278 average, 12 homers, 58 ribbies, has hit 29 doubles this year, and his 113 WRC plus is the best of his career. But with the youth we have in the outfield and the fact that he is looking for 4 years at around $12 million a year, might be time for us to move on from Mr. Brodin. this offseason. Coma Duran is a little different. 28 years old, and he's put up a 137 WRC plus this year, his first full season in Buffalo. 24 homers, 78 ribbies. Been one of the better offensive players on our team. Issue is he's looking for 5 years at over $20 million a year. That's going to be very hard for us to do if we don't make some changes. But think that with Coma Duran's bat, that's one that we'd certainly intend to want back next year. We also have starting pitcher Alexis Mendoza, left fielder Juan Romero, and catcher Mitch Houlihan, as we talked about, as 3 arbitration eligible players expected to be making 10, 12, 13 million a year. A number of lower priced arbitration eligible players also. If we decided that this was the off season to finally move off of Sincere Shazier and potentially try to trade him away, that could potentially help us open up the money to bring back a Coma Duran or a Broaden if we wanted to. Unlikely that we'll be bringing back everyone who's headed to arbitration too. I would think that Ben Elmquist and Tegan Tiley at $3.5 million a year for utility guys could be near the end of their tenure with us as well. So we've got a lot of levers to press, but we're going to be losing potentially a couple of big outfielders this offseason if we don't make some moves. I do like our outfield, and I do like the youth that's coming up, so it's possible we will move on from both of them, but just kind of wanted to throw an initial preview out there of what we're thinking. And Juan Romero, who was off to a slow start this year, kind of got a lot less attention with Rojas and Coma Duran both having big games and big seasons early in the year. But all Romero's put up at this point is 35 homers and 87 ribbies, as he's trying to lead Buffalo in homers and ribbies for a 3rd consecutive year. He's been a really positive acquisition from Atlanta, strong player for us the past 3 years, and he's making sure with his performance that we're more than willing to bring him back in arbitration next year, and also that we don't ignore him in favor of some of the shinier toys that we brought on board this past offseason. Another week in the books here on September 16th, 2 weeks left in the season, and we have clinched our 14th consecutive playoff appearance, 92-56 record at this point, up 11.5 on the Marlins, so the magic number is 3 for the NL East. Certainly going to end up winning that. 4.5 behind the Padres, going to be tough to get past them for the best record in the National League. Right now, I'd say our goals are number 1 to remain healthy, and a secondary goal, assuming that we will win the NL East, would be to at least get to triple-digit victories, which means we have to go 8-6 or better the rest of the way, which should be achievable. Seifu only up 7 steals on Joe O'Hara of the Mets, so certainly the favorite to lead the National League in steals for a 14th straight year, but not guaranteed at this point, particularly if he gets banged up. Barajas and Shazier with 16 victories apiece remain tied with others for the National League lead in wins. And it was another good week for the Wings. We took 3 out of 4 at Washington and 2 out of 3 at Montreal. Interestingly, losing both of the final games of each of those series as we were trying for the sweeps on the road. We're home for the rest of the regular season now, 4 against Pittsburgh and 3 against Atlanta. So with 7 games to go, we're 97-58, 8-2 over our last 10. We're still 3.5 behind the Padres for the best record in the National League, so unlikely that we're going to get past them. And looking at the best record in baseball at this point, we are 5 games behind the Guardians for the best record in baseball. So with just 7 to go, I'd say the main goal now is to remain healthy. Seifu has been running a lot lately, and I haven't been simming the games individually, so that's just coincidentally, but with 73 steals and a 14 stolen base lead over Joe O'Hara of the Mets, Seifu going to lead the NL in steals for a 14th consecutive year and actually lead all of the major leagues this year. And Barajas and Shazier likely one start for each of them this final week of the season. They're still tied for first with Mike Moore, 17 wins this year, leading the National League, and second in baseball behind Dan Rodriguez Murillo of the Guardians. So the big goal is to hopefully remain healthy this final week of the season. Andrus still about a week away, so pretty unlikely that we will get one game out of him. Would have loved if he could have played in that final game of the year before the time off before the NLDS, but seems unlikely that that will happen, which will probably make our roster decision a little more difficult for the playoffs. But I do think that Andrus, with his profile of well above average error and arm ratings, is our best defensive shortstop. Only a 68 WRC plus this year. But looking at his fielding stats in terms of his zone rating and his defensive efficiency, he was a little bit above average in terms of his play at the position. He'll definitely be on the postseason roster. I guess the question is whether we'll have potentially let Mike Whitehead supplant him, given Whitehead's better bat, 289 average, 92 WRC plus, the same kind of range, but his error, arm, and his turn 2 ratings are not as good. He has, at least on paper, been pretty much just as effective defensively as Andrus, though, with a bit above average zone rating and defensive efficiency as a shortstop this year. So we'll have some interesting decisions to make as far as our playoff roster. Right now, the goal is just to get through these next 7 games healthy and well, and hopefully win at least 3 of them to get to 100. And we ended up splitting our series with Pittsburgh the hard way, losing the first 2 at home before winning the final 2. A couple of our minor league staff members have retired, so we'll have some work to do there this offseason. But stand at 99 and 60 now with 3 games against Atlanta to go. The 8-5 victory against Pittsburgh, Eric Barbarito got his 9th win of the year in what will be his final season. And then the 8-4 victory, Barajas got his 18th win of the year. ERA will finish at 2.87, struck out 8 over 5 innings. So Barajas, who was a Cy Young Award winner 5 years ago back in 2036, with an 18-4 record, over 200 strikeouts, a sub-3 ERA, 4.6 WAR. Probably not going to win it this year, but would certainly expect to see the captain get some votes for the National League Cy Young Award this year. Shazier will get a chance to tie him with 18 wins over the next couple of days. I'm not sure exactly when Mr. Shazier is going to go. Looks like it will probably be tomorrow. And we won the first game against Atlanta before losing the final 2 games of the regular season. So we're definitely not playing our best baseball of the year with a 3-5 record over our final 8 games. But we did end up getting to 100 victories this year. We'll sim forward to tomorrow to the beginning of the regular season and then check out all of the league leaders. Seifu with the 75 steals led the majors in steals. Juan Romero tied for second in the National League with 41 homers, led the team once again. And Barajas ends up tied with Mike Moore with 18 wins on this 2041 season. So given that the media had us predicted to not even make the playoffs this year and be a mid-80s playoff team that was supposed to be 1 game out of the NL wild card, felt like things overall went pretty well. 13-game lead, 13-game victory over the Marlins for the National League East. We ended up 5 games behind the Padres and 8 games behind the Guardians for the best records in the National League and baseball, respectively. So weren't really close after the 118 wins a year ago during the regular season. Was not as smooth sailing in the regular season for us this year. And taking a quick look at the pitching before we head to the playoffs, I really like our rotation of Barajas, Mendoza, Shazier, and the rookie Jim Lance. Lance with the 2.68 ERA had the lowest ERA of anyone on our team. Somehow went 10-12 for us, despite the strong lineup behind him, and just missed out by 1 inning in terms of qualifying for the ERA title. Barajas, with that 18-4 record, as we talked about, did lead the National League in wins this year. Turning to our everyday players, and we'll take a look at where the living legend Deshaun Seifu stands at the end of this season in terms of his batting stats. As we talked about, led the National League in steals for a 14th consecutive year. Put up 75, not a bad number for a guy who's now 37 years old. As we head into the playoffs, he is 256 hits away from joining the 3,000 hit club, so still think sometime in the summer of 2043, if he remains healthy, he will make it there. With 1,152 steals, he's still over 250 stolen bases away from Rickey Henderson for the all-time record. Don't think he's quite going to get there, but we'll see what his ratings look like when all is said and done after this season, and more importantly, when next season starts. Batting average was 275, so ended up being kind of this mid-30s version of Deshaun Seifu. Ended up being a pretty typical season for him. You see, after he had hit 300 for 5 consecutive seasons in the prime of his career, his contact and his speed have dipped a little bit over the last few seasons, but he's been pretty consistent when all is said and done, with 271, 276, 278, and 275 batting averages. Been slightly below average over those 4 years in terms of his offensive production. Still put up a WAR of close to 3 this year, but that 2.9 figure is the lowest figure for a full season in his career. So he's 37 years old, certainly closer to the end than he is to the beginning of his career. But another solid season from Deshaun Seifu, hopefully on his way to 3,000 hits and enshrinement in Cooperstown. And hopefully at some point he'll get a third World Series ring to go with the 2 that he won in 2034 and 2036. And we'll find out how he does in potentially making that dream come true in our next episode. Until then, thanks so much for watching, and hope you have a great day.